Welcome here, everyone. We're excited to gather you here for the first time in a really long time. We are having a fireside chat. And in this space, I'm really grateful to share this space with my co-CEO, Renee Mitchell, and our special guest, Moh Al-Haifa, founder of Zebra Grove. Mo, I think we've known each other for a little while, and I actually don't think I asked you how you pronounce your last name.
It's Al-Haifi. Al-Haifi.
Al-Haifi. That's really funny that I didn't notice that I knew that.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. All right. We're grateful that you have showed up for this conversation. We were having these conversations at our weekly meetings, and we wanted to make sure we weren't in an echo chamber, and it was kind of interesting to see the seeds of these stories come through all the conversations we were having with everybody else. So we thought we'd bring everybody together. Um, if those For those of you who are new to knowing who we are at Tandem, we are a purpose-driven organization that partners with companies, founders, organizations that are working towards a regenerative business model. So we do work in finance and accounting, people and culture, strategy and operations, and IT and cybersecurity. At the heart of our work, we are reimagining business as a force for well-being and not for extraction. So we invite you here fully with your breath, your body, and your presence. So I'd love for everybody to take a deep breath with me and through your nose. And we're going to take a deep breath in for arriving and let it all out. And one more time. So we're really here. Take a deep breath in and let it all out. I want to acknowledge that lands that we are on here. Myself, I'm here on the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh lands, but I wanted to do something a little bit beyond a land acknowledgement. I wanted to share a story that was shared with many of us that I met at SBI last year from the then chief, and Kel Salem, who offered a little bit of a little bit of a history lesson of how in 1923 his grandfather was able to amalgamate 16 nations uh, of this region to come together as the Squamish Nation. And he joked that it was because of that we here in the region only have to uh, note three lands that we are connected to deeply here instead of 16. So that was a little lesson on what people have done in our in our presence to co-create together, come together, and pool resources and community and land to move forward together. And I wanted to bring that into the space of what is possible for the work we all do here in connecting community, using our businesses as forces for regeneration, for good, for a place where we can be. So that's where the conversation is going to start. I'm going to pass it over the next hour. We have a pretty condensed agenda. What we'll be doing today is having a conversation about this topic. We invite you to use the chat as your as your voice also. We may or may not bring in some of the voices from the chat into the conversation, but please bring them into your breakout rooms. So we'll be having 2 breakout rooms where you'll get to meet some folks 2 times, so we can keep these conversations going. And if you notice something that's not working, like please use the chat. We've got a couple people uh, taking care of you all in the chat space. So I'm going to pass it over to Renee.
Thank you so much for that and for bringing us into this space together. I've just so been looking forward to this conversation, and I wanted to frame a little bit some of the places that we've mapped to go together in conversation today. We'll be unpacking how supremacy and capitalism have been shaping our collective definitions of success. Often these definitions are in ways that separate us from care, they separate us from community, and they separate us from the planet. There is a through line through supremacy culture to climate change that we feel is important to bring into this conversation, and you will have seen that in some of the resources that we shared. And we believe here at Tandem and some of the voices that we're bringing into the room that the road to addressing climate change runs through decolonization. And by taking time to honor Indigenous ways of knowing and rebuilding economies, we can root them in balance, reciprocity, and in care for all living systems. So that's just a little bit of that framing of where we'll be going today. We've shared some materials that were in the Luma invitation, and I think they might be reshared again in the chat for those who missed those items. They're just things that kind of inspire us and that we've been talking about and what grounded us in this conversation today. Thank you so much for joining us, Moh. We're so excited for this conversation. I would love if you would share a little bit about yourself with those in the room.
Thank you so much, Renee. And thank you, Tania, as well, for setting the context. My name is Moh, and lovely to see everyone. I'm originally from Yemen, and I grew up in Germany. So I moved to Germany when I was 7 years old and have been living in a few different countries ever since in my adult life. So currently I'm calling from Porto, Portugal. Also studied and lived in Scotland. That's why Zebra Growth, the business I run, is also currently mainly based in Scotland, even though we're a fully remote organization. I've been in the marketing and the business slash startup world for the past, roughly speaking, 12 years, starting within kind of content creation and social media, but then starting to evolve into working really as a first marketing manager for multiple startups, and eventually kind of watching both Yemen, my home country, turn to flames and witness multiple different really colonial and post-colonial wars slash humanitarian crises, whilst also looking and going deeper into the marketing business and growth world. So I think it was around 6-7 years when those two worlds really clashed and collided. And when I really started to question whether I want to continue in marketing and want to continue the work in helping businesses grow and communicate in ways that are feeling often quite extractive, quite manipulative, quite unintuitive in many ways, and I started to realize, reflected a lot of these colonial kind of patterns or mindsets that often are the cause of so much injustice in the world. So that's kind of my journey, I'd say, towards this place. Today, 5 years later, my co-founder Lee's also in this call. Welcome, Lee. Nice to see you. We both started Zebra Growth about 5.5 years ago, really with the mission to reimagine what marketing could look like in a regenerative context. So, and I think the more we started to both go on a journey into understanding and learning more about colonization, decolonization, as well as living systems principles, living systems in general. So having taken, for example, a permaculture design course about 2 years ago really helped me try to understand and unlearn a lot of the things that I've been kind of trained to learn as a very young, ambitious marketeer and startup founder, which eventually led me to my burnout. So with that in mind, I'm very excited to be joining today and to discuss the concept of success, because I think in marketing specifically, it is something that is such a root systemic cause of how we think about success in a business and in a marketing function, a marketing strategy, and how we market in general, that it often is unspoken about. So even within the sustainability and in the impact space, it is often something that is kind of missed, ignored, skipped. And I think it's something that we need to actually discuss more. So just as a context, we've started to ask our clients how much is enough growth quite often at the start of a relationship, rather than how much growth do you want to achieve. So really starting to reframe that mindset around why are we even growing? How are we doing it? For what purpose? And are we aware of the bigger patterns and powers in place that we probably were trained and indoctrinated not to be aware of? So that's maybe a bit about myself. And I think just as a side note, I shared one of my favorite philosophers and poets and thinkers in the space, Bayo Kamalathi, I think in the notes. So hopefully that's something that you can also check out. I must admit, it was hard to choose one, but really that's one person I think that helped me also start to reframe in different angles this concept of success and starting to look at success as a bit non-binary. Compared to what we're used to, maybe.
Yeah, I think thank you for sharing your background. And I think a lot of us have been on that journey of being attracted to entrepreneurship, being attracted to tending to organizations and feeling challenged with maybe like traditional business culture. I know I'm studying right now and doing my MBA, and I was really particular on where to take that program because I didn't want to just be programmed with whatever the status quo, what business as usual has been, because I think that's gotten to us to some places today that that are not helpful, especially when we think of the conditions for thriving. So I want to kind of take that thread and draw it through just that traditional way of doing business through resource extraction and kind of shifting it towards something different. So, Mo, I know you've shared a little bit about your work with zebra growth and that lens of like unlearning harmful systems and imagining growth differently. I guess in your business, you've also had exposure to a lot of different businesses and working with a lot of different founders. So maybe what are you seeing in kind of that broader ecosystem of business and how people are running their businesses?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's also something that we discussed when we talked about this last time, that actually it's kind of hard to pinpoint one thing that I can share about all of business. So I've, over the past few years, me and my co-founder have probably trained over 400, 500 impact founders or head of marketing, head of growth, as well as worked with probably, hundreds of impact organizations that are wanting to approach growth differently. We are one of them. And I think maybe the thread is that we're all still in it to figure it out. I think there's a few threads that we did notice is that, we do start to reframe, or at least the ones that are really pushing the boundaries, it is try to reframe growth and how we see growth. It's to really try to connect growth and impact and really make sure that it's not a siloed two sections in the organization, but growth, marketing, impact really becomes one with the operations as well. So it's starting to take this more holistic approach on how you approach growth and marketing. It's also reframing the success factor of marketing and growth. So obviously, marketing in the past for the non-NGO world, for the for-profit world, has really only served one purpose and one purpose only, which is, again, often unspoken about or very enthusiastically spoken. Okay, it's usually either one of the two, which is to profit maximize. So, and usually marketing and growth is the engine of that. So actually that is the core purpose of the marketing function. Now, that is also the core purpose of a business indirectly as well. And that's something I'm sure you've been thinking a lot about. And at the same time, then the connection also with capitalism and the connection with colonialism and colonial patterns comes as well. So really seeing those connections and starting to ask these root questions is something that the best organizations are doing. Do they know it all, and are they doing it right? They wouldn't say so, and they're probably all probably more insecure than people think when it comes to how they're approaching their growth marketing and growth strategies. I think one thing I'm learning though more and more, it's going to the root elements. So as I was saying before, how do you start to look at things more systemically? How can you actually back up every statement with things that are legally documented, in a process-wise documented, that are transparently shared? So that line of doing and saying needs to become really, really, really thin, and ideally should vanish. And that's something what the best I would say in this space are also doing right. And I think finally, it's really trying to get the concept, and maybe this is something we're going to get to in a bit, but understanding that we're in a system right now that is capitalistic, and we're trying to build another system that's still emerging, and so it is messy. And I think therefore we need to understand that perfectionism is probably going to be our biggest enemy, and guilt as well. So, and this is something that I'm often a victim of feeling ashamed or guilty of doing something that's maybe not fully aligned. But I think I'm learning that the best out there are the ones that are okay to recognize that and to go through that and to pick up the responsibility and to fix that on a continuous basis. And that really can apply also within your marketing, within your brand identity, within all of the campaigns that you're doing, within how you're approaching growth. And then maybe just one last thing, and then I'll pause here, which is the concept of scaling deeply. And this is something actually we're hosting, for example, an online event about in the next few weeks. Actually, a concept that was coined by the Systems Sanctuary, which is a consultancy and think tank and research organization. And it's really the concept of starting to flip the script and trying to understand that scaling and growing doesn't only happen upwards and doesn't only happen by reaching more, but also by deepening the quality and the relationships of your existing ecosystem, deepening the quality and effectiveness of the impact that you're trying to work on. So it's also trying to reframe what even growth means and not look at it as one specific singular kind of linear approach. But I'll pause there. I don't know, Renée, Tania, if you have any thoughts or comments.
There's so much to unpack. Yeah, I think that it'll lead us into a beautiful kind of segue after our first breakout room. There's so much tension in this kind of transition moment, and the perfectionism is real. The perfectionism of like, how do I do this right? What is the right way? But we're creating it kind of in real time. Tania, I'm not sure what comes up for you, but that.
Well, I wanted to ask you a question, Mo. What does that actually feel like to become aware of things you need to let go of? Like, where does that show up in your body? And like, what are the sensations that show up so you can recognize that?
I mean, I'm sure a lot of us are feeling it all the time, and I'm feeling it all the time, but I'm suppressing it most times. Um, I mean, usually it feels like anxiety in your body, right? It feels uncomfortable. It feels, especially again with that layer of shame and guilt, once you recognize that. It's also this like letdown, I guess, the feeling of, letting yourself and your team and this responsibility down. And by the way, I think there's two approaches to that. So it's either you beat yourself up around that and you kind of pull yourself down, which actually doesn't create any change and doesn't actually address mainly the issue that is in front of us, or even worse, doesn't address the people that we might be accidentally harming. Because I mean, most of us have good intentions, and I think the other route is just to actually ignore it, to feel like actually this is always going to be the case. So again, it's either all in or nothing, and therefore the ignoring element comes in play as well. So I think I've recognized those patterns both in me, and like I said, I have you can notice that on a bodily, in your throat, in your stomach, in your chest, having tight chests around that, and I think that's natural. And I think recognizing that more and recognizing that actually we're living in a system that actually induces that. And that it's only normal to feel that continuously, and seeing how you can start to manage that. I'm talking about it as if I've nailed it. Again, I've not nailed it. This is something that I'm continuously working on and have a long journey still on. But again, this is, I think, what I'm recognizing more and more what true regeneration is, true regenerative leadership is, and how you can approach your organizational growth in a true regenerative way. It's really understanding this humble, continuous development and growth element. And it's going back, and I think this is something that even came up in our last conversations. It's going back to just true innovation, right? It's what do we need to let go of, and what do we need to actually adopt in this ever-changing world that we're all adopting and evolving in. So I really feel that, and I hope that the future of innovation is just regeneration, and that it just means that this is the next season and cycle we're entering in. We're probably at the start of that at the minute, and it's exciting. And at the same time, we're all going to mess up a lot at the start. So we probably better accept that quickly and be compassionate. I think this is something that a partner of ours, Ashanti, often says, is how can we really own up to this time and start to become more courageous, really show the courage, but also with care and compassion. Because really doing that courage without the compassion and care to oneself, as well as to our peers and even our enemies, is not going to get us where we want to get.
I
Hmm.
love that so much. I know when you shared that last time about regeneration as innovation, that was so powerful, because I know Tanya and I talk every once in a while about like, oh, our name, like Tandem Innovation Group, or like, does this still resonate with us? And when you made that connection, I was like, okay, I think innovation has been co-opted as this kind of like, again, continuous growth, hockey stick, growth at all costs, the move fast and break things of Silicon Valley, and that doesn't align with how Tanya and I lead. So yeah, I just
I mean,
thought
that's so 2010 to me. That doesn't feel innovative anymore.
it doesn't. It really
I
doesn't.
think it's an opportunity to pick things up and revisit
Mhm.
who we are and our relationship to how we describe things outwardly and inwardly. And that might change with who we are and who we are becoming. We might have very different connections to words that maybe we never took a moment to fully look under, feel into, and really reassign whether that is how we want to feel or how we want to present ourselves or what we want to put into practice. And I asked that question, Mo, is a lot of words in when we pick up the conversation of the decolonization or white supremacy culture. I can remember not very long ago how uncomfortable those words were to even say out loud. I loved hearing them. I loved other people talking about them. I was like, oh, that's so like audacious. That's so courageous. That's but I didn't feel like I could say those words. I felt a whole, and then I think through the practice in many communities that I belong to, I can see folks here from the SVI community. I work with B at the Linker. We do this all the time, which is just picking up and asking yourself why you're uncomfortable with the words and owning those words for yourself again. That and then letting go of some words that no longer serve you or retaking some of them back because some of them in the social sphere has been co-opted and really what do we need to do to make them ours again? You know, they are from nature, they're from an essence that have have more than a social marketing, remembrance. How do we take that back? And I think a lot of that has to do with how we feel about the words. And I don't want to say like feel like, how do you feel about like, I feel sad, I feel good. If it's actually like the sensation you have of like pure joy or gut gut throwing up, all those real deep sensations that we have been suppressing, and I think that changes the way we show up in the world as leaders, in actually allowing those sensations to be alive and letting go of them or speaking them all out, and having that alchemy happen is what will allow us to have this change in our times.
Beautiful. I might pause us there for a breakout room. Our intention, because this space always attracts the most amazing humans, so we wanted to give some time for you to meet one another and create some space for some small breakout rooms, just to take a few moments to introduce yourselves more personally to one another, share kind of what brought you here, what curiosities you have, anything that comes up. There's no prescription or prescribed chat. It's just giving about 9 minutes or so, and Ashley will facilitate putting everyone into rooms, and we'll come back in about 9 minutes time. I don't know if this is a moment where we pause the recording. Welcome.
Welcome back.
We were very particular about the length of time for breakout rooms, because I'm sure we've all been in spaces before where you get like 3 minutes and you're trying to just quickly share a few things. So I hope that was just enough to have a little bit more opportunity to share with one another. And we'd love to hear if there's, people sometimes feel shy or self-conscious, but if there's anything that people want to bring into the big space that came up in the small spaces, we just welcome folks to come off mute if there's anything that they feel like might be a nice seed into this conversation today. And if not, that's okay too.
Megan.
I think I'll share just because I loved talking with Prashi and Jude. I think two threads came up that I would love to hear from others. One was around, we can feel and talk about all of these things in spaces like this, but then other parts of our life, whether it's our family, our neighborhood, our like parent community or school community, it's almost like people aren't talking about it at all, and we're going about just not sure how to bridge these two worlds, especially when you know so much and you feel so much. We were talking about this unacknowledged grief that shows up, especially around climate change, and we're not quite sure what to do with it all the time. And so it builds and compounds. And the other thing that we kind of touched upon, which I love seeing here in the room, different generations, was kind of looking at, is Jude was talking about how Gen Z is kind of bringing up this new kind of energy and these new questions. And it's like, we're learning across generations, and hopefully kind of, hanging on to hope for the future because of the things that are coming to light, and the way that we're shifting business. And I'd just love to hear from others if that's apparent for you, if you feel like there's this kind of groundswell from the younger generations up on how to reimagine this, or are we all doomed? Hopefully not.
Kind of a beautiful question to, how do we not be separate people to the different people in our lives? I think folks that have been on my own journey have probably are good witnesses to, you're this person in this space, you're this person in this space, you're this person in this space. What happens when they all come together? To you, who are you when they all come together? I don't know if I have an answer. I think I still do that. And sometimes like I have multiple lives, or I have multiple personalities. I'm not sure which it is, but I think I learned this from um, sitting with B. And if you haven't met B before, you should get her book. Somebody put a link to her book in the chat because we've had the opportunity to have like long road trips, and she shared this one story about just experiencing being things with people without talking. And what does that mean? You're having a different experience? Maybe. But you're also sharing an experience that has no words. And I found that to be such a teacher when we're doing this work, when we're trying to explain our ways into different, like, and I have this at the dinner conversation at home all the time, which is like, how do we just be in the same, I don't want to say time zone, but to be in the same space together without language? Can we get there first? Can we enjoy smelling the same things, or seeing the same things, or creating the same things before we use language that is personal, and might come after the feeling and the sensation and being first. Um, so that would be my invitation to try that in that conversation, Megan, and others as an experiment. What does it feel like to let go of like explaining how different we are in different communities, and maybe letting that go? What does that open up for us? Um, can we and that would be the collective experiment I would love to put out there.
Yeah, it's so I remember this thread actually came up in a conversation between Amal and I, who's also in the room with us here today, just about also like how we have our public selves, especially in places like LinkedIn, and how to show up authentically in a space that feels like, oh, there's some performative aspects. And I think this is like a thread to a whole deeper conversation that we could have. And I'm curious, Moh, before we change course a little bit, or kind of dive a bit deeper into some of these things, what might have emerged as Megan shared that piece around the separate selves, and then also the connecting with different ages, and the grief and the climate change grief. Yeah, lots there.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot. It's definitely something, Megan, I think about a lot. All of our clients think about a lot. Sorry, the conversation around bridging, yeah, just bridging different audiences, left, right, political audiences, bridging different mindsets. And there is definitely, again, not a final solution. I think we can actually learn by looking at actually very traditional branding and marketing in many ways, or at least some elements of it. And I think one thing that the marketing and business world really unlearned over the past few years, which maybe at the start they were still doing a bit better in the older times without the internet, is to deeply, deeply listen. And the more you actually listen and cared, the more you'd understand who you want to talk to and communicate to. That's not the solution to everything, but I think there's a big hint in that, is that I think we, even in the regeneration space, are not listening enough to the other side, to the right wing, to the racists that are growing right now, which I'm not a fan of racism, trust me. But at the same time, I'm recognizing the magical alchemical moments are usually when there's deep understanding from both sides. And that's, like I said, actually brand strategy 101 is like, how do you actually understand who you're really talking to, understand their needs, understand their desires, understand their frustrations, and show compassion. And I think then to what Tania said, it's the senses. How do we actually bring everyone back to our bodies is definitely really, really important. It's also how do we remind everyone about our unity through storytelling, through things that has happened and stories that we don't need to remake. But through that, I think it's also bringing that unity closer to, oh, it's nothing actually new. We just removed ourselves a bit from that. And I think the last thing which we've been also really looking at is just communicating externally. Ideally, I would say you would want to, like, at sometimes we do have to take different masks and different personas, and I think that's also okay. Again, we can't be perfectionist about that, and especially within systems, that's often even needed to survive in many cases. So I'm not saying that that should be labeled as good or bad, but at the same time, I think the goal of trying to get more as one, as an identity in even different audiences with a few personalization approaches does make sense because it's living more to your truth and actually can have more of a ripple effect. But I think that only works if you also approach communicating to others in this compassionate, ideally trauma-informed, non-triggering, no matter who the other person is, approach and way. And I think that also requires what I'm learning is to go kind of be aware of the emotions that are involved. And I've gotten this wrong in even multiple campaigns. This is the same as conversations, or if you want to launch a campaign somewhere and you're creating billboard ads or creating a video for a TV ad. The challenge of how do you communicate? Where is it coming from? Is it coming from a place of fear, from a place of lack, from a place of maybe actually hate over the love? And maybe there's also love inside of it, but it's these kind of softer emotions of where it's coming from. And I'm seeing those that are, inspiring me a lot of the times are kind of going beyond these emotions, and they're recognizing these emotions and are stepping beyond them and thinking, well, what's required in this situation to create the unity rather than create the us versus them. Because the more that we have this us versus them, the less we can bridge. And I think this is something that I've been realizing, especially over the past year or two, with the extreme polarization that's been happening all over the world. All of our clients are witnessing this.
Yeah.
Everyone is thinking about it.
Thank you. Thank you for taking us to those spaces, and it's there's so much of it that's connected and interconnected. So when we're talking about ourselves and how we show up in spaces, also how our businesses show up in the greater economic space, business space as well. So Lee had his hand up for a moment and wanted to bring something in the room. So maybe we can take that that reflection that you wanted to share, Lee, and if you
Yeah, sure, no worries. I kind of like was going to share, and then I was like, okay, I'll not share, but yes, I'll share. So just something that came up in or I shared in our conversation with Fatima and Drawer. We were, I think Fatima asked a question around the point that Mo raised earlier about what is enough growth, and she was just asking, like, is that a number? Is that like, is in discussions with our clients, is that a number, or is it like, is it just more of like, do we just sense into that? And I just shared an example. So where I went to answer that question was just ownership and exit, and what that looks like in business. And I just shared that we've been quite inspired recently by just some of our clients and the way that they've designed how they govern and how they still build in their personal ambition and their goals and dreams, and what financial security looks like to them. They build that into their model, but not in a way that's extractive. So one of our clients, for example, really does want to exit the business at some point. And they're a steward-owned organization, and they've built in an exit plan, which means that they don't get a lump sum, but they get a universal basic income from the business post exit. And I just like that I find that really inspiring. And we're aspiring to be a steward owned organization. And Um, yeah, that just came up, so I thought I would share that.
Hmm. Thanks, Lee.
No worries.
Well, yeah, governance, I don't know. I could really go into like a deep nerdy space and I will save everyone here from that, but I'm like governance and structures and all of that and kind of like why we've built things a certain way and what we could do otherwise really has me captivated. So I love that you brought that into the room. We know that, I mean, I'm not going to assume, but we shared a lot of resources that kind of speak to the things that have been lost, the things that we've become disconnected from. And I think there's a lot of that out there. And I think some of us are looking for signposts for um, I'll use the word experiments that people are running that are moving their businesses towards care and regeneration and decolonization. So I'd love to hear, Mo, again, from your lens, similar to us working with so many different businesses, what you've seen people experiment with in terms of things that are making that shift towards the businesses that the world needs. And I think that might take us to a beautiful place.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I think I'll maybe just add to actually Lee's examples. I think we kicked us off really with that nicely in terms of just governance models and operations structures that a lot of our clients adopt. So not only do we help them then share the campaigns, but they're trying to reflect those key values that they've set up the campaigns on and try to really see how do we reflect that internally within our operations, within our governance models, within our funding structures. And I think that's been super, super inspiring to us. It's definitely, again, they don't have it all figured out, but they're at least considering all of that and at least taking baby steps in many, if not all, of the directions. And also acknowledging where they're still falling short and they're, intending to work towards. So I think that's been super cool, especially with something as dry as a governance structure, which might not feel exciting, but actually can, help create, like it actually changes the way you communicate externally. It really changes the leverage you have and the type of communication you can do more honestly and authentically. I think another example I'd like to introduce is something that I mentioned before about scaling deeply. We've had a few scenarios where, I mean, the worst scenario is when you get funding and you're pressured to grow because there is an extractive funding model that's attached to you needing to grow a certain amount in a very specific time period. So that's been usually the biggest challenges we faced, which is, I think, important also to mention. But on the other side of the coin, it's actually founders and founding teams that are very hesitant to scale fast, that I've had some of the most interesting conversations with, um, ones that are actually building roots and networks for years before they pretend, before they actually project high growth. And it's because they really are planning systemic, network-based, community-based, global, but distributed and with care designed kind of ways to grow. And it's not as designed as maybe it just sounds like, because actually a lot of it is also very emerging, but it's the conversations with those type of people that I have every 3 to 6 months and then start to help them a bit more in a few phases. That's what gives me a lot of inspiration as well, is how do you start to actually think about your growth in multi-year, 5 to 10 plus years approach, and how do you start to think about the conditions that you can start to seed over the next 1 to 2 years that will allow for scale, but not necessarily always of your profit, but really scale of your impact through these deep networks and relationships that you're building over time. Again, this in traditional marketing is called network effects or network marketing. So there is also overlap with some organizations that have been doing this even in the non-regenerative space. But when you're taking this concept of building with care and building towards impact at scale and not just profit at scale, that can be a really, really nice way to set yourself up for slow, strategic, relationship-based, and ideally, like I said, somewhat localized approach of scaling your impact. And I think one last thing is the best examples that I've seen also that is also not common, but again, I'm recognizing the need of that more and more, is to bring those that are least heard into the process of actually designing your campaigns, making key strategic decisions, really validating. So it's okay to make assumptions, but really to validate the assumptions as fast as you can, and really bringing those that are usually, like I said, never heard. The 1 to 2% in your events that are coming that aren't very represented. So really not only inviting them, but actually seeing their importance in the decision-making process of any campaign that you launch, of, like I said, especially if you're thinking about your growth strategy over a long term, or you have a small community in place and you're wanting to learn and better understand how to improve it, iterate it. Who are those that are usually not heard? And how can we actually see the important value that they can help us see? And that's kind of a approach that, like I said, sadly is not a common practice, and yet I see so much potential for that. And the more we just try to do that for some of our own campaigns, the more I just realize the power of it, which is really designing for plurality, right? It's designing for things and like diversity in who is actually the receiving end of what we're communicating and what we're offering. I think those
I
are like a
wanted to,
few things. Yeah, please, Tania.
I think there's a big gaping piece of that conversation, which is resources. I think resources that we come to discover are not always with the best intentions or aren't seated with a regenerative lens. And I think there's an opportunity for us to name that when we come across it. Because I think we have a lot of wealth in the world. It's a lot of accumulated wealth. And there is a need for it to go somewhere. When we can have the conversations about where that wealth needs to flow back to, so that we can have a more imaginative experience around what could become of that wealth, that nutrient, that capital. I think it's our job right now to actually ask those questions for those who have that opportunity to reseed it and reflow it. What are we, how are we making sure that it goes back into communities, that it goes back into our ability to, that universal basic income just actually happens? How do we use governance now to take away the need for governance later? What are we okay with letting go of, letting them be stabilizers, but also be aware when we depend on them or they're just too fragile? How do we have this conversation with folks in this room, folks that we know? As we're building businesses, we come across communities of intentional money. And I think the community approach of capital is a really important conversation to have, and get behind what is behind the words, and actually re-ask the question, is this what you really mean about your capital? Is it our collective capital? Will it ever be? Do you have that in mind? How do we get there? Because I think we end up in relationships where there's false pretenses around what the actual, where that flow is going and where it ends up. And I think if we ask those questions, we can very quickly discern how quickly we can actually use those nutrients and use that to make what we're building flow a little easier, share in the resources, take away some of the stabilizers that we put in there, and actually reseed pathways that were always there, but we have forgotten about them. So that's a conversation that I would love for folks to have more deeply with those those interactions, those relationships.
Yeah, there's really like every lens in business could be looked at from a regenerative lens. And I think that's where over the past few years, we've really taken Tandem from a finance and accounting firm to bringing in people and culture, strategy and operations, and IT and cybersecurity. And sometimes people are like, how do these things map together? But it's not necessarily what we do, it's how we do it. And I just bring that into the conversation as we could go so deeply into so many different aspects. And I think this conversation where we're different practitioners and different people in different spaces running different types of businesses, but it's the why and the how we're doing it that I think it's really powerful in making this change to businesses that are better for people and planetary well-being. I know we had planned some time for another breakout room, but I want to see if there's any other places we want to take this particular piece, because I think once we come back from our breakout rooms, we might take a few more reflections and then let people get back to their days. But yeah, Mo, maybe I'll offer it to you for any thoughts that you might want to bring into the room before we do another breakout room together.
Sure. I mean, I don't have too many thoughts to add. I think I'd just like to echo what Tanya said around also just finding the ways to make things easier. And a lot of the times it really does come down to what conversations and relationships do we need to nurture and strengthen and explore, reimagine how we can explore together. How can we unite forces, even if that is someone who I wouldn't have partnered with before. I think like asking these questions can sometimes really unlock things that were often, like Tanya said, is already kind of sitting there and it's not utilized. I think it's also looking at what's from a growth and marketing point of view. One lesson that we've been learning over and over again is like, what do you already have? And an exercise that we do with a lot of founders or marketeers at the start when we're doing a bit of an audit and trying to understand really like where are they at and where are their strengths and challenges at the minute. A lot of the times it's actually not knowing. And again, me and my co-founder Lee, who's here, we've been guilty of this multiple times, of actually not recognizing the existing relationships that we've developed over years and not actually seeing how do we professionalize that? How do we support ourselves to strengthen those relationships? How do we prioritize that? How do we become more aware of that? How do we show genuine care? So not how do we go beyond how do we get engagement, but how do we actually show genuine care? How do we genuinely add value to those people? And I think once we do that flip and with a lot of our clients, again, things start to emerge that you would have never, kind of imagined before. Maybe also just one quick mention, this book called Mutual Aid by Dean Spade. I've just started to read it, so I'm not fully through it, but definitely recommend as well. Maybe that's something you can also share as a resource. But the concept of mutual aid is something that Tanya, you kind of touched upon, of how do we actually ensure that we also give and have that embedded in our businesses, have that embedded in the way we grow, without an expectation to be able to gain something from it, but purely with the intention to give. And also, how do we learn to ask from maybe things that we usually wouldn't have been able to ask or wouldn't usually approach to ask? So it's this, thinking about the value exchange. I just wanted to underline that as maybe a nice way to close. And with that, also the question, and maybe even a question that you can carry in these breakout sessions, if that's something you feel drawn to. But who benefits at the end of the day, I think is a really, really important question. And what are the structures we're currently on that we're benefiting from as well? I think these two questions are things that I'm trying to always bring back and invite to my own practice. And something that sometimes unlocks ways to be like, actually, I do benefit from this and this and this. And actually, if I choose this strategy and I don't include those people, that's how actually there are certain people who would benefit over others. And how can we start to just become more aware of those?
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. I think we will go into some breakout room time again for just, again, it kind of that thread of like building community, being in space with others that that were drawn to this conversation today. And yeah, anything, feel free to bring into your breakout rooms, anything that that you feel compelled to share, to offer, reflections, things that are coming up for you. And we will do another 9 minutes and then come back for hearing a few reflections of what came up in your rooms. And yeah, just grateful to have some time together.
I think that's over to you, Ashley. If you want to put everybody into threes, that would be great. And I think we're go. Okay. Thank you.
Welcome.
Welcome back. All right. I think I will have an opportunity to bring in a thread here. Anybody want to come off mute and share something that came up?
Yeah, and even if it's not through this breakout room, maybe it's something you wanted to share from the previous breakout room. There's no rules.
Fatima, you're going to share your mic drop?
Oh, Joanne has her hand up.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a thought that's been percolating since you were talking about the different personas, Tania, and I think for me, there's like a distinction between wearing a mask and performing and having different parts of yourself and allowing yourself to show up in different ways. So I think about this in like the context of dating and like there's certain people that just bring out a different part of me. And like last night, I went to my first improv class and I was like, I witnessed a part of me that I didn't know existed. And I think the distinction really lies with like, are you operating from like fear and like protection? Or is it like creativity? Is it creation? And like kind of what when Moh mentioned, like there's no good or bad, there's no right or wrong. Sometimes we do need to protect ourselves, like especially when there are powers that be and there's been like trauma. That's sometimes a valid response. And I've been like geeking out about the nervous system, and sometimes our nervous systems are just not like equipped to be in that creative space, and that's okay. I think it's just a signal for us and maybe where we can learn to resource ourselves and resource our nervous systems. Because at the end of the day, like a lot of times we're just operating in what's in our window of tolerance, and our ability to be in that level of consciousness and intentionality is deeply tied to like how safe we feel. Those were my thoughts.
That's gorgeous.
I love that so much. A few folks know I took the trauma of money training program a year and a half ago, I think it was now. And I think I had something in mind of what the course content was going to be like. And it was so much in what you were sharing, Joanne, about the nervous system and about our bodies and how that impacts how we move through the world. So I love that you brought that into this space because it's very, I think that's why we keep bringing it back to how, like what's happening in your body and kind of where Tania started us off, that question to Moh. There's really a wisdom there that we've forgotten or become disconnected from. So yeah, I love that.
Just to like add to that, there's also like if you've experienced trauma in the sense that it wasn't safe for you to feel that when you were younger, it's not like it's a deeper level of conditioning. So I personally, like, I'm pretty open that I work with a trauma therapist, and I've found it super helpful because there's times where like I can't actually feel the feeling and I can't act like if I'm feeling shame or guilt. But when I work through it and with someone who can hold space and create the safety for me to actually feel it in my body, then action becomes significantly easier. So I think like, yeah, coming back to the complexity of some of these things and like taking that trauma informed approach as well.
Absolutely. And it connects, there's like a through line to how we show up as leaders, to how we lead in our businesses, to how those businesses impact the environment and the people around them. It's absolutely crystal clear that the work that we do to make that shift towards better planetary health, well-being for people and planet, it's really a path of self-development and doing that work and going into the things that we generally, or maybe just through programming, through all of the things we want to avoid going there. And it's really going into it that leads us through to the other side. So
I'm gonna take a moment to do a proper close, so folks can stick to the things that boundaries that help them get through their day. But I wanted to first thank everyone for showing up and wanting to have these conversations. We will share snippets on LinkedIn so that you can, one, continue these conversations and see what sprouts from it, see what connections that you found here from other folks. Or maybe you didn't get to meet some folks because you weren't in their breakout room, but you could have a conversation with them on LinkedIn, so that we can inform what the next conversation should be. Please tell us, what you would have wanted to see more of, what you loved, what you're like, don't do that again. All those things help us better understand what we're supposed to be here to convene. So I'll invite everybody to take a deep breath. And breathe in all the love and the curiosities and the joy shared in a conversation today. And breathe out all the things that hold us back, stunt our imagination, and keep us small. So another deep, deep breath in for the intentions that you want to bring forward into this world. And a deep breath out so that you can share those with everyone here. Thank you again for joining us. And I'll stay on for a little while if we want to have general chit chat. We're here. And I just love seeing all you beautiful humans here. Thank you. Thank you, Moh. Thank you, Renee. Thanks for everybody joining in on this conversation.